Welcome to Doctrine Dive. Black people, one of the largest ethnic groups in the world, have had a profound impact on the history, culture, and spiritual traditions of humanity. The question of their origins, particularly from a biblical perspective, is an intriguing one that has been explored in various ways over the centuries. While the Bible does not provide a comprehensive or explicit account of the ethnic origins of all groups, it does contain narratives, genealogies, and cultural insights that offer a framework for understanding the story of the Black people. The origin of Black people according to the Bible. The Bible, particularly the Old Testament, provides a rich and intricate tapestry of genealogies and stories, many of which are foundational to understanding the people and nations of the ancient world. When considering the origins of Black people, it is important to note that the concept of black, as we understand it today, through the lens of race, was not a category in biblical times. Ethnic and cultural identities were instead defined by lineage, geography, and the cultures of specific peoples. One of the earliest references that many scholars turn to when discussing the origins of Black people in the Bible is the story of Noah and his sons. After the Great Flood, Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are described as the forefathers of the nations of the earth. The descendants of Ham, in particular, are often identified in biblical tradition as the ancestors of many of the peoples of Africa, including those who would later be recognized as Black Africans. The most well-known and often debated passage that relates to Black people in biblical discussions is the story of Noah's curse upon Ham's son, Canaan. According to Genesis 9:20-27, Noah, after planting a vineyard and becoming drunk, was found uncovered in his tent by his son Ham. When Noah awoke and discovered what had happened, he pronounced a curse upon Ham's son, Canaan, saying that he would be a servant of servants to his brothers. Over time, some have misinterpreted this curse as a justification for the enslavement of Black people, falsely assuming that Ham himself was the forefather of African peoples. However, this interpretation has been thoroughly discredited by biblical scholars. The curse was specifically upon Canaan and not Ham as a whole. Furthermore, the biblical text does not suggest that this curse was connected to any inherent characteristics of a people group. Historically, the association between Ham and the Black African people was a later development, rooted more in social and political agendas than in sound biblical interpretation. Instead, the descendants of Ham are associated with various nations and peoples. These include the Egyptians, Canaanites, and others, some of whom would inhabit regions of Africa, and their cultural and historical significance is far more complex than the simplistic racial interpretations that emerged centuries later. The Bible provides several references to African nations and peoples, many of whom were Black. Egypt, in particular, is frequently mentioned in both the Old and New Testaments. It was one of the great civilizations of the ancient world and played a central role in the biblical narrative. The descendants of Mizraim, one of Ham's sons, are traditionally believed to be the ancestors of the Egyptians. Egypt was not only a place of great wealth and power, but also a significant location for many key events in biblical history, including the enslavement of the Israelites and their eventual exodus under Moses. The story of the Exodus is one of the central themes of the Hebrew Bible, and Egypt plays a prominent role as the land of oppression. The Israelites' liberation from Egypt is seen as a pivotal moment in their history, and it is no accident that Egypt is portrayed as a place both of bondage and of the long-awaited deliverance. This dual representation of Egypt in the Bible reflects the complex and multifaceted role that African civilizations have played in the development of biblical history. Another notable African nation in the Bible is Ethiopia, often identified with Cush in the Old Testament. The descendants of Cush were considered to be the ancestors of the Cushites, who lived in regions south of Egypt, in what is now modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia. The Cushites are mentioned multiple times in the Bible, and they are often portrayed as a people with a close connection to Israel. In fact, Moses himself had a Cushite wife, Numbers 12:1, and the Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon, is traditionally considered to have come from the region of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is also referenced in several prophecies, particularly in the context of God's plan for the nations. In the book of Isaiah, for instance, Ethiopia is mentioned as a place where God will display his glory, Isaiah 18:1-2. In the New Testament, the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8:27-39 is a powerful example of the spread of the gospel to African peoples. The eunuch, a high-ranking official from Ethiopia, encounters Philip and is baptized, demonstrating the early Christian movement's reach across Africa. While the Bible does not directly address racial categories as we understand them today, it offers a nuanced portrayal of African peoples that highlights their importance in the unfolding biblical story. The inclusion of African nations like Egypt and Ethiopia within the sacred text speaks to the integral role these cultures played in the biblical narrative. Moreover, Africa is often symbolized in the Bible as a place of both hardship and hope. Egypt, for example, symbolizes both enslavement and salvation, as the Israelites were delivered from its oppression, yet it also symbolizes refuge, as Joseph and Mary sought safety there with the infant Jesus, Matthew 2:13-15. Ethiopia, on the other hand, often represents nations outside of Israel that will ultimately come to recognize the sovereignty of the God of Israel. One of the clearest and most profound references to the biblical inclusion of African peoples is found in the prophetic literature, especially in passages that foresee a time when all nations will come to worship the God of Israel. Isaiah 19:23-25 envisions a time when Egypt and Assyria, along with Israel, will be united in worship of God. This passage highlights the inclusivity of God's plan for the world and reflects the idea that African nations were never excluded from God's divine plan. The historical relationship between Africa and Christianity also traces back to the early church period, with African figures playing a crucial role in the spread of Christianity throughout the Mediterranean world. Early African Christian leaders like Augustine of Hippo, Tertullian, and Cyprian of Carthage made significant contributions to Christian theology and helped shape the early church's doctrines. These men were instrumental in defining key aspects of Christian thought, such as the nature of the Trinity and the defense of the Christian faith against various heresies. The spread of Christianity in Africa, particularly through the efforts of missionaries and the establishment of Christian communities in the ancient world, led to the development of vibrant Christian traditions across the continent. Today, Africa is home to a significant portion of the global Christian population, and the influence of African Christians continues to be felt worldwide, as African churches are among the fastest growing and most dynamic in the world. The question of the origins of black people according to the Bible is not one that lends itself to simple answers. The Bible itself does not treat race as a concept in the modern sense, but it does present a world where African nations and peoples, both the descendants of Ham and others, played a central role in the unfolding story of salvation. From the ancient Egyptians to the Cushites and beyond, black people are woven into the fabric of biblical history. The Bible's treatment of African peoples highlights themes of both hardship and hope, bondage and liberation, and judgment and salvation. Whether through the stories of Egypt's oppression of Israel or the promise of Ethiopia's eventual participation in God's kingdom, the Bible provides a vision of inclusion and redemption that transcends ethnic and national boundaries. As we reflect on the legacy of black people in biblical history, we are reminded of their integral role in God's unfolding plan for the world. Their story is one of deep significance, and understanding their place in biblical history enriches our appreciation of the diverse and global nature of the Christian faith.